I thought long and hard about how you address this enormous story that's far too big to encompass in a movie. There's 400,000 people involved, a vast scale of myriad human experiences. And ultimately what I chose to do is focus on the elements that make the Dunkirk story unique from just another war film or whatever. And it's the survival aspect and the suspense aspect. And so I wanted to address the story very much in the language of suspense. That's the most visual language of film there is. And so it leads you towards an approach stripped down of dialogue, really looking to the visual masters of the past, either of the silent era, guys like Murnau and von Stroheim, or later on Hitchcock and his great mastery of visual suspense, or Clouseau in Wages of Fear. This kind of storytelling is what I wanted to do. And so you wind up needing to fragment the story into, broadly speaking, land, sea, and air. These three strands that you intertwine over the course of the film. And the reason for that is I want to tell an intensely subjective version of this story. So I want to put the audience on the beach with the guys who are there on the beach. I also want to put them in the cockpit of a Spitfire with a pilot who's got about an hour's flying time over Dunkirk and is dogfighting with the enemy. So when you're cross-cutting these different timelines, you're never departing from the subjective storytelling, the human scale storytelling, but you are starting, hopefully, to build up a coherent picture of the larger events that need telling in any version of the Dunkirk story. It's that as opposed to jumping out to politicians or generals in rooms with maps, pushing things around on maps and explaining things. So everything for me in this film is about intensity and suspense. It's about trying to stay in a human scale of storytelling, but get across with clarity the larger movements of the evacuation. I approach the structure from a very mathematical and geometrical point of view. A lot of diagrams, a lot of careful planning about how I was then going to write the script. And so the structure I settled on is one that it's based on a musical structure called the shepherd tone, which is a musical illusion whereby you can keep climbing up the scale. It's something I'd used in my scores, like the David Julian score for The Prestige was the first time we experimented with it. So you're continually going up the scale, but you never seem to go out of reach, if you like. And I wanted to try and apply that to screenwriting, to a narrative, and say, okay, with this story, can you braid together the three storylines in such a way that you create the idea of a continuing rise in intensity narratively? And sustaining that is the challenge of the structure and the way in which I approach different or complex structures, as I have in the past, and I do with this film, is you diagram it, you get a hold of it mathematically so you know exactly what it's meant to be doing. But then you sit down and you write the script from page one right through to the end of the film, the way the audience is going to be receiving that information. And the hope is that in that way, you're actually creating a cohesive and an organic rhythm and story movement built on a very constructed set of parameters, but not through cutting and pasting, not creating a fractured narrative so much as disparate story threads that braid together to make one coherent story.
The call went out. We have to go to Dunkirk. Ready on the stern line.
What are you doing? You know where we're going.
Into war, George.
I think you try and create something where the whole is more than the sum of its parts. And so you try and avail yourself of tools and structures and things, the underpinnings of the film. You have time as a filmmaker, you have years of planning to put into this experience that the audience sits there for under 2 hours and receives. And so what you're trying to do is mess with and alter the very rhythms of filmmaking. I found myself looking at the films I've made in the past and saying, I have a particular fascination with the third act structures that I've been putting together and how they have what I consider a snowballing effect, whereby you're cross-cutting parallel action And as it's coming together, 2 + 2 starts to equal 5, 6, 7, 8, and you get this kind of snowballing of momentum. I wanted to try applying that very rigidly to the entire film so that we're creating an intensity of experience that accelerates from the audience and carries the audience forward in a way that hopefully they're not used to. And hopefully it's something that, without exhausting the audience, we're trying to destabilize the usual way of watching a film and the usual rhythms of watching a film.
He's on me!
I'm on him.
You're looking at their physical situation. You're looking at the task they're faced with physically. And you don't want to be in that position. The film is dragging you into an empathetic relationship with them through the openness of their expressions and the genuineness of their reactions. And you are being dragged along on their journey. You don't particularly want to be there. You want them to succeed by virtue of the fact that you are empathizing with another human being. We're really looking at stripping away the words. And when you don't have dialogue, when you're not giving the actors much to say, you're trying to give them just the essentials, you're then creating an environment in which other things are naturally going to arise, other concentrations, other emphasis is going to be there because the emphasis is not on the words. It therefore starts to become about other things. It could be sound, it could be music, it can be picture, a combination of all three. But you start to notice the feel of things. And that really, for me, particularly when you're working with large format film with its high resolution, its analog color and so forth, you start to be able to avail yourself of what that format, the richness of that, what it can give you in terms of other storytelling tools, other things that the audience can hear and feel and notice that move the story forward, that aren't just words.
Down you go!
It is about a feeling of authenticity. It's not about authenticity itself. And so, for example, we use a French destroyer from the 1950s to play a British destroyer. And we dress it as well as we can, but it's 80 feet longer. There are differences from the historical record. But for me, the feeling of authenticity of having a real boat there that actors are actually interacting with, as opposed to an authentic CG recreation of the historical reality, those are the sort of trade-offs you're making. And so we have a Messerschmitt 109 that has a yellow nose, even though they didn't paint the nose is yellow until about a month after Dunkirk. But we need the audience to be able to distinguish between that plane and the Spitfires easily. And so, for me, it is about a feeling of authenticity. It's about a feeling of a world you can believe in.
You can practically see it from here.
What?
Home.
My job as a director on large-scale films is to marshal a huge set of resources and then ignore them completely and ignore the thrill of them and really try and be ruthless in my pursuit of the particular image that's going to advance the story, and then figure out what's the next shot that's going to further advance the story. Every now and again, when things get really tough, you let yourself sit back and enjoy this enormous playground that we've created for our group, and the fun in which, even though things get hard, you can have great joy and great entertainment in that. For most of the time, you have to put blinkers on and really try and forget where you are and just watch it with the ruthlessness of an audience who is used to having all kinds of riches laid out before them, and takes that for granted, takes process for granted. It's not about how hard it was to make the film. It's about how does that shot move me as an audience member. And as the director on set, that's the mindset I have to be in most of the time.